Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Friday, November 1st. Building some more community content with Rob Jones. How you doing, man?
Good. Halloween was successful. Um, it's always weird the day after because I feel like my blood sugar levels are going to be out of balance for the next, I don't know, a couple days at least. But it was fun. We went as Team Rocket, the wife and I. So we even did a little. I was working on a clip. Their speech. We did it from like a RP RevOps HubSpot perspective. It's good. The costumes were good. I have the purple hair and all that. So that'll be coming
Nice.
out.
That's good, man. That's good. I'm glad you had a good time. I closest I got was dropping off and picking up, which is good for me. Um, and then, luckily for me, uh, the little one has a milk allergy, so that means all the chocolate, comes my way. Uh, it's a good deal. Um, but yeah, man, excited to get into it today. It's been a interesting week. I know you're working on some fun stuff too. Um, and we could probably talk about the challenges of buy-in, forever when it comes to content, that works, content that builds relationships and good communities, right? Because it's a bunch of intangible stuff that eventually comes back to the bottom line eventually. But that doesn't always work so well in conversation. So we both got a couple of things to share, but I'd love to. I think it's a good starting point because you're working on something fun, and I'd love for you to share, what you're working on and why it's important to you
Thought you said
to
you weren't
get
going to bring
something
this
like
up
this
because
done.
this is embarrassing. Yeah, I'll share it. It's important. It's a Christmas album parody. We did a couple of songs last year. Just man, I'm trying to remember what they were. Oh, we did 12 Days of Christmas. So we did that. Uh, 12 Days of Salesmas. We did something else. Carol the Bells. It was pretty funny. Uh, but now we're trying to do like I can't, now that's what I call parody Christmas music. So for those videos, those commercials, those old timey ones, it was like, have you been listening to the same 26 Christmas songs for the last 15 years? Introducing all, trying to do that. And we don't need all of the lyrics rewritten. If you look at a lot of Christmas songs, they're just poems with music in them,
Yeah,
more so than songs now. So you don't need all of the repetition and you don't have to do the whole song. You just need a quick, like whatever the main hook is, turn that. We've got some pretty funny ones done, but I assume your question is like why why would you do this?
I mean,
I
I
may
would
not even need you
like,
for this interview because I would ask myself the same question whenever it's your turn,
yeah,
Chris. We'll come back, but yeah. So
there you
why?
go.
Uh, I'm not 100% sure yet. Part of it is for whatever. There's some algo reason in here. There's some brand familiarity in here. I posted something yesterday that was a music video called "The New Tech CEO," and it was interesting that I saw people showing up in comments and in engagement and whatnot that I hadn't seen in a long time. And there was no doubt that that's why the video performed better, more impression, whatever. But that's kind of what I'm known for, like is that funny, parody, silly, musical, that kind of stuff. So there's one part of it that's like whether I want to or not, almost that is still I still have to do that. And there has been created this familiarity, almost trust, whatever you want to call it, from doing the same types of stuff for so long. Like that's just now expected. So I don't know. There's a lot of good reasons. It's fun. It's makes me laugh. I think people, if it's done well, enjoy it. But there's also this. It's not that I'm even trying to sell to the people watching it or trying to get those people bought in or trying to pitch them anything. But there is because I'm not sure what they want. But there's like this 95-5 rule of like 95% of the people are not going to be buying anything at the time. 5% will. That's still 100% of people that you have access to that can form an opinion about you or for like you don't have to be like transforming stuff or a thought leader. My whole saying is you don't have to be top mind to be top of mind. So whenever people need whatever it is we offer or whatever it is they can ask me for, I'm very top of mind for them. So that is, I mean, the
That's a
best,
shirt
probably most
right there.
ridiculous answer I can give, but that's part
We
of
need to
the
put
why.
that on a shirt. Like, you know, to be top mind, to be top of mind. I love that.
Yeah.
It's 100% truth. That's where just make sure when you are top of mind, there's some good vibes there.
That it's for the
Uh,
right reason. Yes, like
right.
that. Yes, thank you. That's the other part of that is like you can be too top of mind, and that's not good. Think about any, we don't have to get into politics or any of that, but like there's insanely top of mind is almost extremism or viewed as that way now. Adam Robinson had he took this from somebody, I think, but there's this spectrum that's like here's one extreme, this is not good, like this is like radicalized, here's the other end of that. The middle is neutral, which means no one cares, it's doesn't elicit any emotional response. And then right here in between the neutral and crazy on either side is like the sweet spot, the money's whatever you called it. But it's like you have to take a side or have a point of view, and it needs to be a little provocative or spicy, or probably a better way to say this is like contrarian. That helps put you that helps. I think that helps the algorithm put people onto looking at whatever it is you're talking about. Like we as a culture are consumed with like forming opinions or being on one or the other side of something. So if you can do that, um, it'll help with that a lot. Now, also there's this other like side dynamic to this where my stance, like the Christmas thing, isn't good or bad. It's just funny. So like part of this is it's almost like a triangle. It's a shape. I'm not good with shapes, but you can also have a take or a perspective that hopefully for me, hopefully people see it as like clever. Mark Twain said, um, like humor is a way to show people you're smart without bragging about it. So that's been kind of the thought is like if I can do something smart, it conveys understanding of a topic or subject without me having to say I know this more than you do, right? Um, what do you think about that?
No, that makes a ton of sense. Uh, I'm finishing up um, uh, the book by Rick Rubin, Creative. What's the last word?
Creative act, yeah.
Creative Act. Yeah. Uh, finishing that up, and on the walk this morning, the phrase that resonated with me was like, context changes the content, and we see that all the time. And that's where, like, if you don't, like, you can see the same exact message in three different posts, and when you see, like, let's say it's, uh, on that scale where it's, a positive new take, a neutral take that's not new at all, and then a contrarian take, like, all those get received differently and consumed differently just because I started with a different framing, a different context for you. And a lot of times that can be as easy as just like, all right, I know how it goes like this in SaaS, but in manufacturing, now all of a sudden it's a contrarian idea and we don't like that word. And like, it's a completely different context. So as you describe that, there's that layer, but also like, are we trying to inform? Are we trying to entertain? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is another way to change that context. Um, so I think that's, it makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me of, the easy mode framework, um, that when I listened to it a couple years ago now, it just made so much sense as far as like creating a formula around how you're accessing the audience. And even though the thought leadership and the educational content is going to be valuable, uh, at some point, it's only valuable if it hits and if it's consumed. And if you're not changing it up a little bit and adding some humanity to it, right? It's like, if you don't have a stance, if you don't have a take, right? Like, and maybe we all know somebody that is pretty neutral in every conversation, right? But I think in most cases, you generally have a take about the topic. So if you're not showing that online, whether it's positive or negative, it's like we know you're not being authentic at that point, right? Because humans have takes. And if you're not giving yours to us, right, that's going to erode trust. Like, what are you after then? What are you trying to accomplish here? And that's where, like, the extremes that you mentioned, that's like, okay, clearly you have an agenda. And like, I'm annoyed now, or I'm just going to ignore everything. No matter how I might click into it because it's just super clickbaity and it's can't stop watching train wrecks, but I'm not going to enjoy it and I'm going to complain about it to somebody else right after. And there's I love how you put that spectrum out there because it's
I,
there.
I think there's a parallel. So there, like, there's this sense of like depth of conviction or depth of belief, really depth of belief with conviction mirrors depth of expertise, right? So like the more strongly you agree or have a stance, what do you think about people that do that immediately? Like, he must be right. Oh my God, like there must be something to that. So the more willing you are to have that opinion or be provocative or be contrarian, number one, like where people can see it like publicly. Um, and the longer you do that, you create a following. Period. If I were to tell you like context changes the content is beautiful. If I were to say right now, if you wear headphones on a podcast, you're an idiot, right? Like I'm wearing them and so are you. That's a point of view. It's not a very good one. I mean, because but if I say like uh if you don't have glasses, then you're not cool at all. Like something like that. It's like in this specific context, it means one thing. If we had 10 people on a call that were all wearing glasses, it would then be funny or be so yes, it 100% does. I think the question is more so like should context influence your point of view? I mean, that's a hard question.
Right.
And if you say it depends, then it already has,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
that's what like depth of belief and depth of conviction, like completely black and white, no gray area in anything. That's what that shows. That's the level of like radicalization that we see everywhere else, right? Or not everywhere else, but I don't want to get into politics or those things you're not really supposed to talk about. But the parallel is there. The whole like if you are a Salesforce user or you use Salesforce, then you're a complete moron, no good, you're whatever. That's not true. Like there's reasons to use it, but like if you can now change the message or change the context to say like if you're still using Salesforce and haven't at least looked at what the possibilities are, then you're in denial. That's to me that's fair. Like it's fair to say things like that. It's still provocative. It still definitely has a point of view. It's hard to just be 100% bought into some of that unless you're incredibly captivated or convicted in what you're talking about.
Yeah. And now, like, the answer to that question is coming clear. Like, I think context from, like, in terms of your experiences that you've had as an individual, like, certainly impacts your point of view in terms of, like, I feel I could I could very passionately talk about Salesforce from that perspective because I had to deal with it, like, inside of organizations, right? I used it. It was my first CRM, right? I tried to do all the things. I understood personally how difficult it was. And as soon as something else came along, in this case HubSpot, I was all over it. Uh, and that kind of experience, definitely can shape a point of view when it comes to CRMs in this case, or just like customer tools. Um, but that's where, like, when you first started talking about that, understand, like, my mind first went to, like, okay, different verticals, right? In manufacturing and SaaS always comes up in my mind as kind of a two boundaries that I always see, and what happens when there's two different environments. And that's where, like, how does that context change how people operate Um, and that's where it comes back to the experience, I think, of like, if you're in those environments and that's the only place you've been, you've experienced business a very different way. And it's not like, it's not good or bad, it's just different. And um, so I think that's how I would, you know, at least that's how I'm answering that question right now. Um,
Well, I mean, I'm not sure of the answer. I just like asking weird questions. I mean, I would say there's like a threshold of context, like a contextual threshold that would either like change your point of view or give you pause or whatnot or not. It's like kids were all here yesterday, so they're top of mind. But my son like pushed somebody, right? It is absolutely against the rules to put your hands on other people unless they're that like, that's the threshold, right? For no reason
yeah,
should you ever do this that whatever, except if this is it. So once you get to that level, it's like you said in different verticals, industries, they've experienced business one way, they have context and experience, but like there's certain things that are I would say true, like across the board. Like it doesn't matter, uh, Salesforce, HubSpot, Dynamics, whatever CRM or tech. If you're onboarding or if you're working with somebody, how they work with you is more important than what you're using. This is just for our example and what we're trying to communicate. Like managed services in RevOps in HubSpot, kind of a non-standardized. It's a complex, it's an abstract kind of concept. So pairing that fact with one, it's easier to create familiarity and a conversation and trust with emotional resonance, not facts or preaching or proselytizing to people. But two, there are some the methodologies in which an agency or a consultant works with you, how they operate is almost I would say more important than anything. That's level one. If you send somebody send a request to a partner and it takes them 3 days to answer it, and then that's not good. That's not being responsive. It's not being available. It's not over communicating. But if somebody pings you 4 days in a row about something, puts it on you, like that's direct. It's helpful. It drives decisions. It's a bunch of other things. What it's not is lazy, but that's a methodology. So that almost comes first. And I think we just specifically for Rev partners, like that's part of the messaging is like all the qualitative data and like reviews and snippets and Slack screenshots are like you guys are like how you operate is why we're still here or why we love you or any of that. So part of the like top of funnel, like middle funnel, like how would this engagement look? What do I need to know about all of this? Let me do background, research on the partner on RP. It's like all of the stuff that they're going to hear is how they operate is second to none. That's the first thing that comes up. Instead of like, oh, their customer lifecycle stages are pretty. We never knew that. That's true too, but it's like the thing that resonates or that they remember or speak into is the method in which we're doing the other stuff.
yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up because, like, bringing it back to the content, like the first thing I talked about this morning with you before we went live is this, feeling of this space where it's very hard to measure. Like it's very unlikely that you can go into the boardroom and say, all right, this Christmas album is going to create this many sales. And that's why we're doing it, right? Um, and as the content creator or the content leader, right? I'd say I won't speak for you, but like definitely found myself in that position where everybody said they're on board with this whole approach, right? And then we get to the point where it's okay, how are you going to measure this? Like, and that's where it's not like anything else in the business that I've seen in terms of we have to create all of these intangible feelings and emotions and like, the last thing we want to do is try to measure that because we really can't in most cases in any kind of consistent and tangible way, especially usually at the scale that we're talking about when it's B2B. Like we don't have nearly enough data points. like to use most of the tools that we're using, like social listening and all those things. It's like, oh, all right, where's your brand mentioned? It's like, all right, it's been mentioned 50 times. It's like, okay, well, there's 7 billion people. Like, how relevant, is that? Uh, but it creates these, like, we buy those tools out of need. Like, we've got to, how can we find a way to measure this stuff? And when you brought up reviews, that's like, I've heard, um, like as soon as you start to tie something to a success metric like that,
It's called
um,
Goodhart's law.
okay, okay,
As soon as a metric becomes popular, it's not as important because everyone's trying to fill it or hit it. Like impressions, reach, likes, whatever. That's Goodhart's law. It's like now, oh, okay, that indicates some correlation to increase whatever other thing we want. Let's just put all of our chips into doing that and create just an influx of AI, whatever that looks like. It's like, okay, the impressions don't, they're not generating anything because we only did it for that. Matt Bolian, we were chatting the other day, and on metrics, like he's an interesting. I've known him for a long time, but he said something along the lines of like, if you don't have a perspective first, and it's not one that has conviction, like in it filled with conviction, then you're not going to know what metrics you're supposed to be looking for. And really, like if you're doing what you're supposed to do, for example, if we're um, saying that our entire mission in life and focus and all of this other stuff is solving for the CRO, right? Everything that we're going to do, like how do we know we're successful? It's not necessarily metric first. It's if we're doing that, people will be referred into new business. Will people will like the messaging and the point of view will allow us to hit net new. It'll allow us to. How do we know if we're going to hit our churn or retention targets? They're not going to want to leave, right? Like that. If you're positioning that and doing things that make whatever your perspective, whatever your clientele is, like love you and seek you out, the metrics aren't as important. Like they'll be understood. We had 50 new, we had 150% increase. That's great. Let's measure it after. Let's make sure we're doing the right things first to get us to this and solving for the people to whom our perspective is oriented. Then the metrics should do a better job of taking care of themselves. If you're seeing holes, you're not doing this part well enough. So you can almost inform, corrections to the strategy, corrections to the messaging from feedback within these engagements. It's interesting because I mean I know that metrics come in, but his point was more so like don't start with that. Um, super
right. Well, yeah, and
super interesting. I
100%.
mean, I had not thought of it like that before, but think about also with that comes in like this adoption of perspective. So it's just an adherence. Like we talk about adoption all the time. What is it? It's an adherence to like a methodology. So if it's a sales process, doing it every time, you can know a lot about that. You can know a lot about a perspective. I know a lot about. I used this yesterday. Like I know a lot about um, Christianity. I know a lot about Buddhism. One of them I don't adopt. Like you can have a lot of knowledge, but it's not practiced. So if you have a perspective and it's not acted, lived out, whatever, uh, through your org, then it won't create as much gravity. It won't create as much natural like momentum.
Yeah. No, and what comes to mind, like we talked a little bit about humanity last week and how that like more orgs could often use a little more of that. Um, in that perspective that Matt shared, it's like when you start with the metrics first, like people build their adoption around the metrics and the process to get the metrics instead of
Yes,
like the purpose, right?
that
Because
is what I was trying to say, dude. That is so good.
thank
There's
you.
a look. I know this is not good TV or whatever, but there's a mark clip button here. It's your studio. I'm gonna mark it. That was so good, man. That was so good.
Thank you. Because the example that I know of, and I've talked to, like the ecosystem right now that we're in is just challenging because the customer base is exploding. Like the wave is definitely here. And That's bringing in more markets and just more diversity of the customer base. Uh, it requires more partners and a diversity of the partner ecosystem as well. But when you like the way it's structured and like the way you get one of the primary ways you get visibility is the solutions, partner directory, right? And I know that some partners are building, into the process, like testimonial at all costs, like nag them until you get the testimonial because the ratings and reviews, drive visibility in that specific place, right? And if we know, like, data proves that if you're at the top, just like Google search, rest in peace. Um, if you're at the top, you're going to get the clicks. But then you build the process around that outcome. And there's humans on the team that don't necessarily like what they deem as like begging for the review, right? And it puts them in a spot where you like, and this is like completely how you're coming at it, right? There's lots of ways to ask for referrals and reviews in very humane ways that makes everybody feel great. Like, of course, I'm going to give you the review, right? When you build the process towards that outcome, though, like you just remove that humanity and it's like becomes, I don't know, man, it becomes like another thing to get done, right? I don't know if I'm saying that. I'm
A
not
process around
that.
what outcome? You just mentioned like whenever you build a process to where you're only optimizing to hit a metric, it becomes about that and it's not about the feel of the perspective, like the heart behind it. If you're for the review thing, what is the desired outcome from that? Like higher ranking, maybe. If you're talking about like the marketplace, like yes, that, but shouldn't the desired outcome be to do such a good job that people tell like willingly leave voluntarily without you having to ask or introduce you into other business or say let's go ahead and sign up for another 6 month term, like this is that's what the outcome should be. I think what you're trying to say is like
Yeah,
if you build a process for a metric or for a certain outcome, you might forget what the actual intent is and what you're trying to actually achieve. Like yes, the reach is good and the ranking or whatnot is good for more reviews, but what you're really after is creating such a valuable experience for the customer that it doesn't make sense for them not to tell people. Like that's what evangelism is supposed to be. It's not you create evangelists through like a perspective or a methodology because they're so bought in. If you do it just to be loud and you don't have conviction, then you become annoying. Then you become like, you know, I don't know. I'm I was gonna say the
yeah,
I word, but like here I like that
yeah,
I think that's an important distinction, right? If you're you can put that in anything,
right.
right? If you're SEO, Google, you just mentioned like rest in peace Google search, right? If you were only trying to optimize that so you could rank and hit targets and drive lead, whatever, then what you're really trying to do is get net new business or whatever it is, you're trying to get deals in pipe. There's other ways to do that that don't involve SEO or Google search or any of that. So that's where the strategy shift I think comes into place. But yeah, your point
Yeah,
of if you're just trying to hit the metric, the intent is lost one, but two, I would say like you can start doing it badly enough or you can start going checking the boxes going through the motions enough that you forget what the actual desired outcome is or was in the first place.
yeah, and thank you for talking me through the thought, because it distracts from the actual goal, right? So in this case, and especially if you're the one, it so quickly turns into like, okay, the customer I am delivering to spends a lot of money with us, and there's no fear that they're ever going to cancel because they love us so much. But that's not good enough. I've got to manufacture this review and then give it to them and ask them to like, I've got to manufacture this part still. Like, eh, not everybody likes putting their names out there. There's lots of reasons that people don't jump up and down to give reviews. right? But that doesn't change the fact that the real outcome is happening every day, and it's like, exactly what you want to happen. So as you talk through that, it's like you distract from the really good thing because we're so focused on this specific outcome, and in that case it is very much a metric, like how many reviews we have and what the star rating is, like, drives conversion, right? And there's a good reason for that, but that's when you start to try and game the system, and this is ultimately, the system is what creates that game that we have to play, and not everybody enjoys playing that, and it has, those unintended consequences, I'd say, at most times. I don't think there's anybody, on the leadership team doing this because they like, you know, uh, some of the unintended consequences. They're just not aware. It's like, all right, this correlates with this, so, we're gonna put that up as a goal. But that's where, when you're not talking to your team, and, not talking to your actual customers and understanding what's happening, right? You're letting the metrics talk to you. This is why I love saying data informed instead of data driven,
Yeah,
because I've seen some bad crashes when you let data drive everything, right?
yeah. The part of I saw this somewhere recently too is very interesting. Is like the concept of suicide by solo threading, right? It's like deals go to die without multiple people involved. But for social and for content and for almost endorsements, the more of a thread or the more people involved, like the harder it is to create an experience that warrants buy-in from everybody, or to create like a vouching experience, like just because people's like reputation, their careers, their word, their whatever is on the line too. So if you're in a multi-threaded situation where you're trying to get buy-in or get whatever, if you don't do an outstanding job of that and people don't willingly hand raise, it's compoundingly evident in situations like that, right? So if you optimize for like clarity, getting everybody on if you optimize for that and bring multiple people in and do what you're supposed to be doing, like having to ask is kind of removed, right? For me, it's the concept of like, hey man, it's my birthday. Oh, happy birthday. Means not now, it means nothing. Like because I told you, I had to say it. If you have to, it's almost if you have to ask for that at all, or without maybe there's situations like reminding or whatnot. But if you have to ask or inquire or whatnot, like that's where I'm going. It's hard to put that into
Yeah.
words.
No, it's like, what came to mind is, like, when it comes to impressions or funny things you might have said before, and somebody's like, "Oh, do that thing that you do." And it's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not doing it. Like, it just lost all value. Like, it's not gonna have an impact. I'm not gonna be committed because I didn't decide to do. Yeah, maybe that's a
Well,
different topic, but it's not, right? Because we want these things to be organic,
I
and
think
then we put
it's kind of the
ourselves.
same top. Like this will help both of us. I think I'm about to drop George B. Thomas's name again because uh, I saw him do something where he was talking about his whole purpose is like the mathematics of one. Like I'll show up and talk if one person is going to get value. I'll build it, whatever. If one person gets value, he did not pay me to reference him, but like his impact, even from just being himself, I'm not sure what he's optimizing for in these relationships, other than the relationships themselves and being helpful. How do you measure that? Well, I'm sure his business can measure it pretty well to show how good of a job he's done because that's kind of where we're getting is like he doesn't have to ask me to talk about his methodology. But that gets back to the methodology. Like, holy crap, his framework for understanding things, and now all of what he does makes sense, right? He shows up to everywhere he can to offer value. He's like the Oprah of HubSpot awesomeness. You get a podcast, and you get, I'll do this. I'll come help however I can. Whatever he's doing, it seems like he's optimizing for being selfless and adding value and all of that to whoever he's in a room with, right? So how do you quantify, how do you like optimize for being helpful and creating good experiences that make sense financially? That's really kind of where we're going.
Yeah. No, and as you were saying that, like, I know he didn't just come up with that topic, but it hasn't always been there, right? And his process of having done this for 12 years and longer, maybe in the ecosystem, it's been about 12 years, and he's like one of the first ones, that did video like regularly, right? And all those learnings, like how many times when we're in a business, like oh, in that example, we need to come up with the awesome mathematics of one concept first, and then we're going to create all this content and everybody will love it, right? Like the feedback loop now on social, like if you're not out there every day, if you're not out there trying things and creating content in all these different ways, right, you're not getting the feedback you need to actually create the things that resonate. And if you think you can just sit in a room and come up with those things, like you're mistaken.
Yes. His I was trying to look for something real quick on that point, but you said that his that hasn't always been a part of his like vernacular or his approach.
I think there's
I don't
lots of things he's coming up with every day, so it's hard
yeah,
to keep track, but he's
with
just
I
a
mean
machine.
some of that is like it almost it's hard to name. Like maybe he's always operated that way, but just recently figured out what to call it. Like there's some of that almost
Right,
naming conventions are important, but not more important than doing the thing. So if he, I mean, whether or not he called it that or not, I've experienced that, beforehand.
right,
I'm sure he's lived like that. You don't get to be that type of person and that impactful without just having done it for a long time. like, but it's the same with all the buzzwords and stuff you hear now. Like, what if we had a way to, you know, be top of mind all the time with content and whatever, and feel like people could reach out and use their network? Oh, let's call that nearbound, or let's whatever that is. Like, those are just kind of naming conventions for things that are happening that are more strategic. I don't really see. This is an interesting question. Like, what do you think the strategy is with that framework of mathematics of one?
um like strategy in which sense? Like his strategy in kind of creating a concept and
Yeah, growing or sustaining himself as a brand or a business. I would say that it's probably word of mouth. Like, irony of ironies, we're talking about it right now. It's like, um, what would make sense as an outcome from that? Well, if he does a good job and he actually executes, people will talk about him, and so he'll be top of mind for it for whatever. That to me is, I don't know, probably part of it. Um,
I think, and it sounds like we should invite him on the show sometime so he can speak for himself.
yeah,
But I
sorry,
do,
George. This is all compliments, buddy.
yeah, no, I do get to interact with him every day, and like thankful that we have the Wake Up with AI, podcast with him and Nico now. Um, but just seeing that, kind of unlock some stuff for him. Like at the end of the day, he's trying to be a good human and help other people be good humans, right? And some of that mathematics of one, like we're literally disallowed from thinking in that way sometimes in organizational contexts where, wait, you're going to spend an hour on that thing and we might only get one person like that gets value out of it. Like, how do we scale? How do we automate? How do we not be human so that we can try to have bigger and better results, right? And at the end of the day, most of us, well, a lot of us are realizing that that's not working anymore, but we don't know how to be okay with the mathematics of one scenario that he describes, where you've got to find a way to operate in that context to be able to serve the kind of value, right?
We do need to bring his ass on here because altruism is not a good strategy for business unless you're in charity work. And that seems to be his strategy, is just being a magnanimous, lovable, color matching guy. But you know what I mean? Like, being super helpful and not getting anything from it can't be the way he's growing. But like that, that's what you're talking about now. Is like, okay, we've now have the framework, we now have the mindset, we now know kind of what to do to show that and display it. Is it making any money? Like, what should we be measuring? Is this, how do you, what does success look like and how do you measure it? I would say, without knowing anything, that it is successful because we're still talking about it now. I could give you a ton of other examples of that, right? With, um, what would be top of mind? Matt Bolins, we talked about him with Supered and kind of the job requirement to make content working there. Rev Partners with like we want to unlock human potential for flourishing and we want people to be known. Like we want to do that. So we can see that working with, we're talking about building community content. We can see that working from more almost always now, more from qualitative feedback than quantitative. So as long if you shift your mindset to like some of how we're going to tell this is working is more in the description and is more in it's less metric like numerical and more linguistic. That's a helpful perspective shift.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why it's and HubSpot of all places did not help with this, right? In terms of this whole like marketing attribution and let we can see all the touch points, so let's build ways to report on them. That's, how Google built that empire. And uh, because it's hard to share the qualitative data that we get all the time, especially when we're, 3 levels away from the boardroom and like nobody's got time and it's just like, well, you got to make time. And if you understand the context of this one-to-one interaction I just had, right, that we know for a fact that things like this lead to a sale at some point, right? Let's celebrate that thing, right? And how many more of those things can we do that we know for a fact that that is a valuable outcome for the business? We don't know if thousands of Google Ads hits, right? Like so much of this is like, oh, this is what we think we're supposed to be doing. We got to get volume. We got to get. Meanwhile, the one-to-one thing that we have always known to work, like we find ways not to do that because it doesn't scale, and right? And that's where I mean, there's two sides of you know the outcomes in terms of the mathematics of one. You described the first one where there's definite growth. Like there's growth happening. He's growing as an agency. He's adding people, so it's not hard to see that he's growing. But that's where the intrinsic value of him knowing that he's helping people is a big part of the outcome, that drives him to do a lot of those things. And that's where like consistently, like you say, it might not have been always called that, right? But he's been his sign off has been, happy, helpful, humble human for almost all 12 years, I think, right? And you got to talk
Yeah.
about consistency, right? That's where uh, you see that guy show up on your feed and there's gonna be something valuable. And what I, when we do content like this and when we call this let's build community content, like the challenge that I would love to solve for and that we always talk about is how do we first allow more people to be able to do things like that, right? There's so many business and organizational things that get in the way of allowing for that. Um, but then how do we also amplify that? Because as well known as George is in this ecosystem, doing it for 12 years, it's not hard to show that when HubSpot customer users, the totals, right, go from 100,000 to 200,000 in 3 years, most of the next 100,000 do not know who George is because they're not in the LinkedIn echo chamber. They're not hanging out on Sparketeer. They're not doing the things. And that's where, these other forms of content, these, could be edutainment, could just be straight up entertaining, right? It's another way to unlock and kind of create exposure to these audiences that you're not going to reach them any other way in most cases. So it's an important part of the process, and that those kinds of intangibles, like you don't always need to be the one creating the content. Like again, back to the community. Like how can we raise each other up? How can we raise the floor for everybody so that, everybody can share their value, but also, get the value back in return in various ways.
I am going to start my framework and call it the mathematics of fun in tribute to GBT. But I would also say some of that another shout out, Christina Garnett in the HubSpot ecosystem. I know she's doing some of her own like consulting fractional work now, but her thing was like voice of the customer and amplify their voice. Do you know how much ROI, like there's this concept we should talk about next week of like the ROI of trust, right? Like how much more money have you made whenever that there was like a multiplicative trust factor that went into it. But if I just optimize for one person, right, like building a relationship and whatever that looks like, and that person just so happened to be Christina Garnett, who has access to. I asked her one time, like, how often do you post on whatever? And it was all the time, but it was almost just reshares and reposts and comments and whatnot. If you talking about metrics earlier, an interesting metric to me to explore is like conversion rate of mentions or like social referrals to conversations. You do that with volume or whatnot, but like I've seen this a lot this week. Hey, looking to switch to HubSpot. Who's the best? Blah blah blah. How many times are you mentioned there in your field, in your in whatever that leads to something happening? Number one is useful to like just how many people are thinking about you and refer you and comment or give you a +1 or vote of confidence, whatever. Two is like how many of those actually turned into um, opportunities, conversations, meetings. So if you're doing that, sometimes can you imagine if you just went to this has actually happened, right? We we sat down at the Austin event for Pavilion. Somebody came and sat at the table, but I was like, I'm just going to talk to this guy. No idea who he was. Talk to him for the whole time, right? In a sea of executives and whatever. And I was like, man, that guy was pretty cool. And towards the end of the conversation, actually, before he walked off, I was like, you know, what are you looking to do today? What breakout sessions? He was like, oh, I'm about to actually leading one of the talks here in a minute. It should be good. I've done it a couple times, and I was like, that's awesome. What's it? All that turned into like the guy was the WeWork CRO. I was like sitting next to, it's like I made him my entire. What if that had been like the perfect fit? So sometimes like it's not about necessarily the volume of connections or engagements or whatever, social or in person. It's like the depth of conversation, the depth of relationship, how well you got to know somebody in a short amount of time that creates those, relationship type of conversion rates. Okay, this guy really, likes us, likes our business, likes me, whatever it is. Is that going to ever convert? Like, how much more time or energy or effort can I get to that convert that into something valuable? And then also asking, is that what I'm after? Right. Like maybe just knowing this guy and for him later to be like, yep, +1 here. You're great. Is that something you should be thinking about tracking, not tracking, considering in how you operate?
Oh man, that brings up another discussion for sure. Because that last thing that you just described, where he like just engages on a random LinkedIn post, right? Like being able to truly measure audience reach and also knowing that having audience is definitely a monetizable asset, right? For businesses now. Like that type of serendipitous, like, all right, Rob, how many, like, out of all the conversations you had today, like, how many likes and were you able to access their audience? Like, what were those numbers? Like, you just start doing stuff for all the wrong reasons in terms of now I'm gonna just make sure I have those conversations. I'm gonna go pick out the CEOs and then right. And instead you just let a natural conversation happen. And those things definitely happen. Like in terms of that's the power of doing this out in the open and the social networking aspects where just you can immediately see changes to the feed sometimes when you get random engagement that you weren't expecting. And now all of a sudden, this new audience shows up that only happens if you get that initial engagement in the first place.
There's nothing that corrodes or destroys trust more than having the awareness that you're on the receiving end of a tactic, right? Like that kills everything. So tacticless is kind of the it's not the mindset, it's not how you should operate. I have an even better story, by the way, like on that. First inbound ever, right? I was there. We were like, hey, let's do a man on the street interview with somebody that speaks. So I literally was walking by a guy getting off stage, relatively small talk at the time, right? But there was a couple people that wanted to talk. I was in line. I was like, hey man, talked, interviewed the guy, did a made it fun, right? And ended up building a relationship with this dude. Next year, see him again at the VIP thing. Took pictures, hung out. He was kind of by himself. We started talking, and actually at the Austin event. Now, I mean, we've built like a legitimate relationship. At Inbound this year, I got a jersey customized from this person, and I wasn't even. It was just like for speakers. He just brought me one because we're I would say we're friends. And then I got invited to sing as part of their conference live in front of Debbie Gibson from 19. It's Jay Schwedelson. Like Jay, shout out. But I had no idea. I didn't know what Guru subjectline.com had no idea who this guy was. Like, is that valuable? Probably. I mean, the jersey is pretty cool. The experience is pretty cool. The access is pretty cool. I can't really put any return on investment on that. But now the priority, there was never a priority of like targeting him or trying to get him to buy something. I just wanted to make content and really just build a relationship. Now asks are easier if I should have them, which I really don't right now. Jay, what's up? Uh, but that's legitimate. So I don't whether or not like I can he ever pays me to do something or any of that is almost secondary, which makes it a lot more likely to happen. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah,
Like because I'm not
yeah,
asking anything of that, it's more natural that something should occur that he'll ask. He asked me that he was like, "We need another singer. Here's an emergency email. Can you do this? Whatever." So there, one of the key defining terms of a relationship that's successful is like reciprocity or mutualism. Anything that's a relationship, even if the relationship is unaware of itself, right? Like a company to a lead is parasitic, right? It shouldn't be that
yeah,
way in thought, but that's like relationships exist even if you don't know the people's name. They still exist. There's a potential for one to exist. So if it starts off as like, not mutually beneficial in some way, even with the intent, then trust is hard to build after that.
yeah. Man, that's some powerful stories for sure. And that's where like when you add it right next to the parasitic relationship, it's like, and you mentioned the asks too, right? We get to that point in a business where it's like, oh, we're doing something new that we would love as many people as possible to know about. You know what makes that easier? A bunch of trusted relationships,
Yep.
like a trusted network, because that's where when you've been pouring value in, you can make very specific asks and they will go to bat and they will go hard like for you because you've already done that for them or they know you will in the future. Like you've built this completely trusted relationship where there's no agendas, right? And like you said, I don't want to be on the other end of a tactic. And when you do not have that network, you are forced to represent yourself only through tactics and these ads. And I think helps give me some clarity to what we were talking about next week or last week. It's like you cannot target somebody effectively if they do not know who you are. It doesn't matter what your message is. Like there's no way to get in there because we know if I've never seen you before and I see this come up on LinkedIn, no matter how much it resonates, I know it's a tactic. because you don't, I've never seen you before. Like, and now you're showing up. So good job. Like, honestly, that's sometimes where I get to. It's like, oh man, like your strategy, might be good, but it has nothing to do with like me knowing and liking you yet, right?
I there that's the contextual threshold example. Like I have shown up to a crash scene with somebody entrapped in a car, and it was a 9-year-old. They did not know who the hell I was, nor did they care at all. But I helped to get them out. They don't. People don't have to know who you are to seek help or to seek whatever it is you're offering, depending upon like the urgency of need. What we're fooling ourselves into is that like your business is going to fail if you don't answer this cold call and buy this car warranty or this product or whatever. That is not the case. Almost ever, right? 95% of people are not even in a buying motion. The 5% that are, of that 5%, how many of those like it's absolute catastrophic failure, right? If you don't book this, that is not the case. That's only the case in, I mean, really what, like life or death, those types of
Yeah.
situations. That is not the case in B2B. But it rarely, like statistically, however you want to phrase that, it is not usually the case. And that's what the tactic like makes it seem like. I think about almost dark versions of those like 90s commercial or so, like couldn't figure out the pill cabinet. Oh, that's not ever
Yeah.
what people are doing. Right. I mean, you know
Do
what
you
I'm
hate
talking about.
doing XYZ?
But yeah, so like if you
Uh,
go, if you the the police and fire service had a series of commercials for a while that was like, "What if you called and no one came?" That was like the tagline, right? Do you know what? Like, if you're having an emergency, you don't have to know the people at all. But that got back to what we were talking about. You do have some familiarity, at least that like the people coming in are trained, that they're uniformed, they're there to help. Like you understand the intent of the transaction, or hopefully, right? Like I need help, you're going to help me. Don't care about anything else. That is rarely what we see in B2B, right? Now, I'm sure there are instances where it's like, I got to have this legal doc drawn, I got to have this done like soon. Don't care. Priority is just on get it. Maybe then, but I would say the use cases are few and far between. And so the tactics that emulate that, like last chance,
yeah.
buy it now, like that is seen
Uh,
as parasitic even before the relationship occurs. I would say.
yeah. And that's where we're bringing it back to like manufactured urgency coming from quotas and KPIs,
Yep.
right? So driving the wrong behavior because we've got to get this stuff out the door because our numbers need it. Um, that's a great way to wrap today, I think. And I'll just let everybody know and let Rob know, like, you know, I'm doing a lot with AI now. And because these conversations are allowed to go all over the place, the kind of value, the analysis that I'm getting of these transcripts,
You have
uh,
AI transcripts of these, bro. You got to send them over. I need
yes,
to know what
no,
what these what.
yeah, no, I look forward to sharing some of the stuff I've been doing behind the scenes to kind of take Let's Build Media to the next level. Um, and yeah, I love these conversations. Always hard to end them at some point, but hopefully, everybody out there found something of value today related to just putting yourself out there, understanding the value that and the why behind building trusted relationships and how you do that online before people know you in person. And yeah, so think about your own content and your own strategy, and find those opportunities, and let's grow. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Happy Friday.
Awesome.
Thanks
Appreciate
for
you
building.
sharing.